I'm Tricia at Club Scrap with the Triple Folio book. I've got my book sample here. Let's just take a quick tour. It's got a fun little D-ring closure with some cream colored twill that holds everything together. And it's made of these 3 folios that are joined together by a series of papers which are carefully trimmed and scored. And of course, I've maximized the paper potential of all the sheets used to create this little book. And we've also included some cut aparts and printed papers so that you can decorate the entire book without really having to search through your stash, with just the exception of the ribbons that I've added for my own personal stash, which you can do the same. I know a lot of us have some extra neutral colored ribbons and fibers lying around if you want to do that. So let's go ahead and get started with the project. I've got my project kit here, including the folios and the papers, tags, closure, and twill. And then you'll also need a paper trimmer, a score pal, and then of course I'm going to stay organized with the help of my accordion pocket file. Now, if you're not a Club Scrap member and you want to make one of these to help you stay organized with your scrapbooking or your card making or project making, definitely reach out to us at Club Scrap and we'll help you get started with a starter kit and video tutorial to learn how to make that handy little organizer. I have also printed the instructions for the Triple Folio book, so let's go ahead and get started. The first sheet of paper we'll begin with is the ivory textured plain. Now, if you're just using paper from your own stash, just pick any old color that you have. If you want to choose the papers in advance, just make sure they all coordinate. I'm checking the grain direction of the paper, and if I hold it from this edge, I notice that it's very stiff. And if I hold it from this edge, I notice that it's very droopy. So when I put this into the trimmer, I want it drooping easily from top to bottom. So that means the grain is running that way, and that will help us later on when we do our scoring and folding. Let's make a series of cuts here. The first cut will be at 11.5 inches. If you're using the Fisker's guillotine, make sure you stabilize on the clear bar before you make that slice. Then slide down to 10 inches and 5 inches. Now this 5-inch piece needs to be scored, so I'm going to set this aside without filing it first. And then pick up the very next piece, which is also 5 inches, and we will cut that horizontally at 10 and 5. Take one of these squares that you just made and file it in pocket B, and the other gets filed in pocket D. And this piece can just be set aside as in a separate pile for decoration if you'd like. And then you have this narrow strip. It's 1.5 inches wide. We're going to cut this into 3 sections. So slice that at 8 and 4. And gather up the 3 little strips that you have here and place them in pocket C. Now all of these pockets are going to help us stay organized because we're eventually going to create quite a few pieces. Now let's take the green plain. So again, if you're working with paper from your own stash, you'll need 2 in this color, but we're just going to use 1 at this point. And I want you to, again, make sure it dips easily top to bottom. And we're going to repeat the same basic cuts, but file the pieces into different places. So let's cut at 11.5, and then 10, and 5. Then set aside one 5x12 to be scored. Pick up the other one and trim at 10 and 5. File one square in pocket B, the other in pocket D. And then we'll trim this into thirds again, so we'll slice at 8 and 4. Gather up those 3 little flags and put them in pocket C. And here's another little piece that we can set aside along with these other 2 really long strips that we have as scraps. And I'm going to turn to the next page in my instructions. Let's find the gold, and guess what we're going to do? We're going to find our grain direction, make sure it dips easily from top to bottom, and then repeat one last time. So 11.5, 10 and 5. Set aside for scoring. Trim horizontally at 10 and 5. B and D. And this goes set aside. And then cut at 8 and 4. And file all that into pocket C. Okay, that wasn't so bad. We have one more scrap. I guess I could probably do those all at once. but all of the larger sheets end up in different pockets. All right, so then I'm going to find the other piece of green plain that I have in the kit. And again, if you're using your own stash of paper, that's fine too. And we're going to make sure it dips easily top to bottom. And this time we will cut again differently though, a 10 and 5, pretty close to the same. Now take the two 5x12s we created, stack them, and we're going to trim these horizontally at 10 inches. Take both of these pieces and file them in pocket A. Oops, I guess we can set these aside for scoring. It's basically folding in half, not a big deal, but we'll score them. Then the two other little rectangles, set those aside, and then take a 2x12 inch strip. We're going to cut horizontally at 10, 8, 6, 4, and 2. So a bunch of squares. These we're going to set aside for our pile to decorate, and then we'll take the brown plain. So in this case, it doesn't really matter which way the grain is running. You just trim it any old way. And I'm going to cut it 9 3/4 and 5. Then I'm going to rotate and cut at 10 and 5. Okay, let's take one piece and put it in pocket B, the other in pocket D. Let's pick up this next strip. This is a little bit narrower. This is actually 4 3/4, and we'll cut this horizontally at 9 1/2 and 4 3/4 to make some squares. Let's file both of these squares in pocket A, and then this we're going to set aside to be scored. This is the, if you have the two scraps, the longer, narrower one is a scrap or used for decoration, and then this other one that we just made gets set aside to be scored. Then we're going to make a series of squares. I'm going to give you all those measurements. They're going to be 2 1/4 inch squares. So our first cut is at 11 1/4, then 9, 6 3/4, 4 1/2, 2 1/4. Gather up all of those little squares, and I just want to give you a little heads up that these squares that you just made, the brown ones, will nest perfectly with the green squares that you made previously. There's just going to be one extra green square. Okay, so now we have this text weight navigation print, and if you are working with your own papers, just grab any print. It doesn't have to be a text weight. And we'll cut at, and the grain direction doesn't matter also. We'll cut at 9 1/4 and 4 3/4. I'll have you rotate the most recently made piece. We'll cut horizontally at 9 1/2 and 4 3/4. And we have two squares the same size. We'll file them in B and C. Then you have this little piece set aside to be scored. Pick up the next piece. We'll cut at 9 and 4 1/2. You have two squares that are the same. File those in pocket A. And then you have this wider piece. This goes in your kind of scrap decor pile. Now we have one more piece. We'll cut at 10 and 5. I'm just planning ahead for you, so these also go in the decorative pile, but they're trimmed so that they're going to fit your project well. Moving right along, you have a sheet of printed cut-aparts, and these were designed specifically for this collection. I pre-measured all the sizes of the ornamentation that I wanted, and Jacqueline, our designer, created the piece. When we trim this, make sure you put this larger section on the left, and then this narrow strip is going to be our first scrap coming off the right edge, and that cut's going to be at about 11 3/4. Just make sure you line up the registration marks that are pre-printed on your cut-apart so that they line up with the edge of the blade on your trimmer. Okay, then we're going to slide down to about 10 1/2 inches and 8 3/4. Of course, fine-tune that. Now be careful here. Some of the marks are white. Some are the one at the top is white. The one at the bottom is black. The registration mark, and it's going to be at about 4 3/4. Now let's rotate so that a little step, This little quote here is on the right, and I'm going to have you cut at, it's kind of a weird measurement. It's like 10 7/8, but if you look very, very carefully, there is a white mark here and here, and that lands me, again, at about 10 7/8. That's intentional. Just bear with me here. I'm sliding down to 7 1/4. There is a little white mark there. It's hard to see, I know. And then one more time, I'm going to have you go down to 3 5/8. I'm sorry about the weird measurements, but there is a purpose to every cut we're making. Okay, so then there is a little white angled hash mark on this piece that we just created. It's right here. And there's another matching one down over here. So if you have your piece with this ship's wheel, just look up this way and then down this way. You're going to see a mark there. And I'm going to line those marks up with the edge of my trimming blade and slice. Check it out. Okay, so these will end up becoming useful in our decorative process as well. So I'm just going to set those aside with my decorative pile. I'm going to grab the very next piece and I'm going to look for the hash mark. So here's the ship's wheel. Now there's an angle coming up this way on this particular piece. Once again, I'll line that up with my blade and slice that. Okay, so just bear with me. There's one more, the third one that we made, and if I put the ship's wheel again in the lower left, the angle happens right here. Okay, so now I have 3 of those sets, and then this little guy. And I'm going to place this next piece into the trimmer so that this rings a bell is on the right, and we'll cut at 10 1/2, or with the guideline, 9, 8 1/4, 7, and 3 1/2, I believe. Yes. Okay, so now these pieces have this angled tag shape, and if you just want to, you can use a craft knife and cutting mat to cut these, or you can just eyeball and try to match the border that's on the sides just to create a tag. And then if you happen to have like a hole punch or a crocodile, you can use those to punch holes in the top of these tags. You can, if you have a crocodile, just punch both holes at the same time. For now, I'm setting all of these little pieces aside, and then I've got a few more to cut. This one, just always make sure the smallest part of the cut apart is going into toward the blade. So I'll cut at 10 1/4. Guess where these little squares are going to end up living? 8 1/2, 6 3/4, 5, and 3 1/4. So all of these squares will end up fitting right on those nested squares we made earlier. Do you remember? I'm sure you do, because we made a lot of them. So we have the brown and green. So these have mates now. And again, there's no prescribed method or formula for decorating the inside pages of your album or your folio. It's just that I'm giving you the tools that you need in order to do what you like. Just one more little piece here. We've got this tiny word seek on the right. We'll cut at 11 1/4. And then 7 1/2 and 3 3/4. Now, if you want, you can put these 3 pieces in pocket C, and I'll explain why a little bit later. And I'm finding another little brown scrap and the word seek. In fact, I think I actually used a piece of brown to mat this in my finished project. Okay, so very fun. I'm going to now set aside the trimmer since we're done with that, and we're going to get to do some scoring. Okay, so I'm taking the pieces that I'd set aside to be scored, and I'll walk you through that. Maybe we'll just take the whole stack and flip it upside down and set it so that we can tackle everything in the same order that it landed in the instructions. And so that puts me back to the beginning where we started with that ivory texture plain. And we're going to do some very consistent scoring with all 3 of the pieces that are this size. So we'll score at 5, 6, 7, and 8. Kind of like we're starting a little dance routine. 5, 6, 7, 8. Then I'm going to flip this paper from the bottom to the top, or top to bottom, whichever way you want to look at it. Just don't rotate it, flip it. And then we're going to score on the 1/2 inch marks in between each of those. So 5 1/2, 6 1/2, 7 1/2. So we're preparing to make some accordion folds with this. Let's take the next piece. 5, 6, 7, 8. Laverne and Shirley comes to mind. Okay, and then flip and score the half. 5.5, 6.5, 7.5. With the green, or with the gold color, 5, 6, 7, 8. Flip, score on the half. Then we have these shorter pieces. They're only 10 inches. Score at 5. And again at 5. So there's 2 of those. And then let me help you file these as well. So the ivory texture, we'll put them in pocket C. The green plain that's been scored goes in D. The gold plain will be filed in B. And the 2 other green plain that are smaller go in A. All right, then we have these 2 other pieces. They should be the same size, one brown and one text weight. They both get scored the same way to make some pockets. So we're going to score a 1/2 inch from each short edge and 1/2 inch from one long edge. So I am right-handed. If you're left-handed, this is an ideal way to score. If you're left-handed, you just hold it with your right hand and then you score this way. If you're right-handed, one little idea is to put it to the right edge of the score pal and score it a 1/2 inch. Then rotate one turn, score it a 1/2 inch. Rotate another turn, score it a 1/2 inch. So it's just easier to hold and work with the paper if your right hand can be in this comfortable position rather than crossing over this way. I'm going to repeat that. So 1/2 inch from a short edge, rotate, score at a 1/2 inch, rotate, score at a 1/2 inch. Now while I have these pieces sitting right here, I'm remembering to do a task that I normally forget, so let's just do this right now. I've got something called an envelope punch board. This is by We Are Memory Keepers. It's a handy little guy, and I'm going to create a little, like a little notch in the top, so the non-scored edge of this pocket piece, by putting in my punch board at 2 3/8. That's going to put us at center. So 2 3/8 inches, and this is mentioned way back. It's like the second to last step, but here we're going to just remember to do that right now. And you see the nice little notch that it creates in there? And I'll do the same thing for this one. 2 3/8. I'm lining it up right there and punch, and I have a nice notch in this pocket. And then these will be mitered and then made into a nice pocket for our book. Okay, the scoring is done. Now it's time to build our book, finally. The next thing I'll have you do is take the twill ribbon, and if needed, you can always take a fabric scissors or scissors that works well with your fabric, because not all scissors do. I have several that I like to use for paper that do nothing with fabric, and I just cut off a nice little scrap of that. I'm trying to conserve most of the ribbon length. To prevent future fraying, I'm going to take some of the bookbinding glue that we dispense from a needle tip applicator and just kind of rub it into the edge of the ribbon a little bit. By doing this first, we're allowing time for this ribbon end to dry, and that way it'll also be a little bit more of a stronger seam for us to work with. So just set this out of the way for now. Next, I'll take out one of the folios, and there are scores. You see the little bump of the score here on the inside of the folio. So what I'm going to do is fold on that score. When I do, try to make sure the folio is nice and straight. These are not made perfectly, but we want to try to make sure that when we fold them, they fold nice and level with themselves, and then do that with the remaining 2 folios. Now, one thing to remember while you're working with the folios is that you always want to make sure that they're right side up. I actually did it once, a sample of this, and I accidentally glued a folio into the book upside down. Yes, so now you know why I know that. Don't do that. Don't be like me. Now I'm going to reach into pocket A and just take everything out of that pocket. We're going to start out with those 2 green 5x10s, and we're going to fold these in half as well. There's already a score line, but if you want to go ahead and just make that crease with the bone folder, that's great. And of course, make sure that this is level 2, like even on the ends. Because you're building the foundation of your book, you want all of these folds to be nice and even. So each of these pieces is going to act as a hinge to hold our folios together. So this hinge will live between the last folio and the second folio, and this hinge will live between the second and the first. You just want to make sure that everything opens and is right side up. Again, you know why I have to remind you of this. It's for myself, really. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, again, I'm starting maybe at the back. So think of this as the third folio. And I'm going to apply glue to one side of this hinge paper here. So with the bookbinding glue, I go around the perimeter, and then I squiggle through the middle. Then I can drop this down onto my folio, and this is important. Make sure the left edge of my fold lines up with the left edge of the folio, and then center it from top to bottom. So I want this folded edge of the hinge matched up with this folded edge of the folio. Then once you know you have that, you can open it up and burnish a little bit. But having this edge lined up will allow your book to open and close easily. If it's not lined up, the book won't function the way you want it to. Okay, so now this is attached. I need to attach the other half. So I'm going to apply glue to this half of the hinge. Once again, go around the perimeter and fill it in. For starters, I'm going to put my folio on top, and I can visualize and see that everything is nice and straight. And then right away, I will open and fine tune if needed. And I didn't need to, so I'm good. And burnish that down. If the hinge is not glued, lined up with the edge, the book will only open like this far. So again, I know these things because things happen. I'm double checking. This is right side up. This is right side up. This is my hinge. So I will apply glue to the back of this hinge paper, perimeter, and fill. And I'll repeat the same process to attach the final folio. Now I checked my twill. I'm working pretty quickly here, so the glue isn't completely dry. I'm just going to do one more little step before we get started with that again. And because, you know, time's a waste and I got things to do. So I'm going to take this this was still from Pocket A. Taking one of those beautiful navigation prints, and I'll nest it onto the brown mat that we've included, but do not nest this onto the folio quite yet, okay? Do the same with the other one. Okay, at this point I think we can put some hardware onto this twill, and you'll notice the twill kind of wants to go in a certain direction. So find what that direction is if you really need to try to figure it out. You can hang the twill from a finger and just kind of watch the way it loops. See here it's kind of bobbing outward, here it's rolling inward, and that's how we want this to loop through the D-rings. So you take both D-rings together. This should remind you of the belts that we used to wear if you were around in the early 80s. And thread the twill through both D-rings and bring it around this way. Now you can make a decision at this point where you want the tail of your twill. Do you want it on the front of your project, or do you want it underneath your project? Either way, you're going to have prongs of a brad showing. Okay, so once you kind of have everything positioned, it helps if you have a cork or something, and maybe a knife, like a craft knife, because this brad has these prongs, and in order to get the prongs to go through the twill, I'm just going to prepare the way. So right in the center, I'm going to pierce through the twill to actually cut the twill, allowing me to be able to get the prongs of the brad through. It went right in. I was relieved when that happens. Things work out. Okay, so at this point, we've got a pretty long brad here. Got some long prongs. So if you take like a wire cutter or scissors that you don't really care about, you can clip off excess prong. Or another thing you can do is just fold it back over onto itself. Maybe that's what I'll do, since not all of you have these handy jewelry tools laying around. So just fold it over onto itself, and it actually looks almost like a staple. Hey, very good. Lovely. Okay, so now my brad is installed. My D-rings are stuck on the end, both of them together. Don't do just one or it won't work as planned. Then let's take our book and we're going to close the D-ring around it. Now I know it's perfectly naked right now, but that's okay. It won't be for long. So to secure the D-ring, thread the other end of the twill through both rings and then open the rings and slide the twill back through one ring. This is how a typical circa 1980s belt worked. Very nice way to make a book closure. Again, the twill is long. You can trim it if you'd like and then re-glue the ends, but it is nice to have a little bit of ribbon to work with, so I'm going to leave mine just as it is. Now turn the book over and make sure the twill is centered around the book. Then you can take one of these nested mats and glue it to the back of the book. Just center it and then flip it over, undo the D-ring, and then add the other nested mat to the front of the book. Very nice. I like the order that all worked out with, and that way I know this is right in the center and right where we want it to be rather than trying to do it later. This is a much easier way to do it. All right, so next I'm going to empty everything from pocket B. If you're following along in the instructions, Folio 1 assembly starts with everything from pocket B. So that really helps you kind of keep things organized rather than having to sort through all of these papers from a big pile. Now this particular piece of gold paper has a series of scores, bumps and divots. So the bump of a score always goes on the inside of a fold. So I can see this bump right here. So I'm going to fold so that I bury it inside. Now if you just kind of flip it over, there's another bump. I'm going to fold to bury it. And then there's another bump. So all you're going to do is just keep burying the bumps. And basically you're fan folding. Another way to say it is accordion folding. Always just make sure the bump of the score goes on the inside or the valley of the fold. So when you do that properly, there will be 3 little mountain folds on the inside and then 3 little valley folds on the other. Make sure those folds are nice and creased. And this is the cool part. So there's going to be a wide end and a narrow end. Take the narrow end and slide it into the side of the first folio. And you'll have to make sure, because there's some hinges in there, some little flaps, you'll have to make sure that it's, you're not getting caught up on that. Or if there's some sort of a malfunction in the way your book was made, you might have to trim your gold paper a little bit. And then slide the other piece into the angled pocket. And now you have the fixins for some pages in a book. So with this, we're going to take the 3 pages that we have and glue one into each of the 3 valleys that we have in the accordion. So this is valley 1, valley 2, valley 3. Okay, so here's our first valley fold. Make sure it looks just like the wings of a butterfly. So what I'm going to do now is apply glue to the edge of this green page. And I'm going to stick this down onto the first flap of my accordion. Oop. Just give it a second to dry. Make sure that this still can close over that. Check to make sure you're nice and straight. You don't want these pages kind of angling to the outside of the book, past the cover. That's never good. So now here I have this next little butterfly. I'm going to add a gold page to this. You can always just test fit it before you apply glue to the edge. And finally I'm going to end with this beautiful ivory texture. Okay, there are 2 pieces left from the pocket. So this beautiful navigation print, we'll add some adhesive to that and nest it right onto the brown plain. And then add adhesive to this. And that's going to go to the inside left cover of the folio. Okay, guess what? Everything out of pocket C will be the way we fill our next folio. All right, I'll take everything out of pocket C. This is a fun one. I love this. And we got our little pieces of artwork here. And guess what? The whole entire process of creating the accordion is exactly the same. So once again, look for the bump of a fold. If you want to burnish the folds, you can do that too. Then the accordion that's prepared is inserted into the second folio in the exact same way. Put the short end into the full pocket, and then the large end into the half pocket, and then you've got your 3 flaps. So now I think I'm going to approach this the same way. We've got our 3 pleats. So the first pleat is the one that makes like this butterfly look. We're going to adhere these flags to this first pleat, and I'm going to use the green on the top, the gold in the middle, and then the ivory at the bottom. So to install the flags, I'm going to call these flags, I just put a little glue on the end and then shove this to the edge of the valley at the top, making sure it's level. This is especially easy to go, to kind of get crooked on that. So you want to make sure that this is in there nice and evenly. This is one of the reasons why I like using a liquid glue for this process, because it's a little bit more easy to fine-tune even once it's pressed up against the pleat. Then you'll notice I'm going to go to the bottom. Make sure it's level with the edge of the pleat and level with the edge of the book. Burnish that. And then I'll use the middle one so that I can visually just center it. So make sure the space between the top flag and this middle flag and the bottom flag is essentially the same. So then here, I think I'll do gold and ivory and green just to mix it up a little. And this, of course, is only personal preference. Do whatever you like. So now this is the second, I'll call it a butterfly, or the second pleat. Push this down into the valley, and I'm going to do the top flag, the bottom flag, and then the center. Then I'm going to plan ivory, green, and gold for the front. Next, what you can do is take the single piece of the navigation print, and I'll add adhesive to that, and place it onto the left side of the open folio. And then I just had you file these because if you take these skinny pieces, they've been designed to fit perfectly onto the flags. So I'm just going to go ahead and adhere these. One to the top. We're just going to stick with the ivory. Here we are in the middle. And then in the third set, I'll put this one at the bottom. That's some nice variety to the inside of our book. Now, obviously, we're going to take everything from pocket D, and here's another hinge page, so we're ignoring those for now. And guess what we get to do? Bury the bumps. So there's that first one. And just continue on burying those bumps as before. And the folio is inserted into the book the exact same way. The narrowest section goes into the full pocket, and then the small section into the angled pocket. So this was a situation where I really had to battle a lot to get this half of the insert into the pocket. So I really fought with it, but got it in. But if it gets a little bit to be too much, then just simply shave a little bit off the insert side and it'll fit right in there, no problem. Okay, then you have 3 additional, well, you've got 4 here. So I've set this up so that the brown paper is what will go on to cover this, and the remaining 3 will be inserted onto the pleats again. So I'll start with gold, and then I'm going to do a green, and then I'm going to do an ivory. Those will be the pages, and then this will cover the inner left cover of our folio. Okay, so now with the pages inserted and our accordion pocket file is empty, I'm going to show you how to make the pockets. So to do that, we'll begin by taking one of those scored pieces, and you'll look where the score lines intersect and miter those corners just by removing a wide corner, like a V-shaped corner from each. I'll do that with the brown as well. I always like to look at the bump side of the paper so I can see a little bit better. And then you can take the side walls of the pocket first, bring those in, and then bring the bottom up. The reason I do that is because if you go up first and then in, every time you try to slide something into the pocket, it's going to get caught on that bottom. So sides in first, then bottom comes up. And if you want, you can burnish that with the bone folder. It kind of makes everything stay nicely. Now, going back to Folio 3, remember we had that brown piece without any decorative paper to put on it. Well, that's where this is going to come in. So we have the text weight piece that has the print, and that's going to become the spot where we put our pocket. And if you want to tack down those little flaps, you can. I'm just going to use bookbinding glue on that U-shaped tab area. And then I'll center this down onto the brown panel on the third folio. Then on the second folio, there is a print panel and no brown. So that's where this other brown can go, is right there. So again, make sure the side flaps come in first. Apply your glue and then center that. Let me remove this little bit here. Center that in that second folio that has no brown mat. So remember earlier we made 2 tags, so you can take one tag and put it in this pocket, and the tag is designed to fit perfectly into the pocket. And the same is true for the third folio. Just insert the tags right in there. We've really tried to think of everything. Speaking of everything, remember the angled pieces that we made with those cut aparts. So you'll notice that the funky shaped piece that it's the larger one of the 2 angled pieces, it's going to nest with perfection onto our angled pockets. And I think it really adds a lot. And I realized that finding those measurements and getting these cut from the cut apart sheet wasn't all that fun. It's a little bit hard to see, but so worth it. I think these just look amazing. Now, as a result of creating these angles, I have 3 little pieces of scrap. And I decided I would try to find a way to utilize those scraps. So what I did is take one of them, and I'm going to find in my first folio the gold. And it doesn't matter where you put these. I'm just telling you where I installed mine. I'm going to put some bookbinding glue on just the outer edge, the straight edges, not the angled not the angled edge, rather, just the straight edges, and then put that right into the corner. And what that's going to create is a pocket for the manila tag that I've included in the kit. How cool is that? I installed one of them, I know, on the hinge between folio 2 and folio 3. So let's go ahead and do that. Just the straight edges only, not the angled edge. And then just plop it right there. It adds so much. Then if you go to the third folio, there's a page that has green on one side and gold on the other. I installed the third and final triangle there. And all the triangles need to be installed on the left side for the pocket to work, with the print side facing up. You might be working with different papers, different materials, but at any rate, I think this really makes a clever spot to put our manila tags. Yay! All the rest of these items, this stack here of nested squares and other images and other papers, can be used to decorate the final book. And again, you know how to close this, and you can create a title. For example, I'll just walk through the entire book. And I know some of you took this class with me locally, and you're eager to see how I finished my piece. So this Journey Begins title was measured to fit perfectly into that space, and there is a scrap of brown that I trimmed in order to fit this. Okay, so it's kind of a nice thing to have. Then on the next page, I also took the narrower strips of scrap that we had and trimmed them to, I think this is 4 3/4 of an inch, so that I could create an anchor for my nested squares. Another anchor with the word voyage. Here's the larger printed scrap with some nested squares. There's my manila pocket or manila tag with a pocket. I cut a little V into one of the ivory colored scraps and added "Be in love with every minute of your life." This we've already installed. Here I've added a larger 5-inch piece with an anchor and nested square. Trimmed some gold paper to mat the journey quote. Here's my tag with the hole in the top and some ribbon. We've already installed our little strips here. This is the hinge between folio 2 and 3. I added another 5-inch piece of print, a gold anchor, and a nested square. Tag with some ribbon on top. Here's a green strip with this rings a bell. A narrow strip with the word "Seek," which I could have matted with some excess brown. That looks nice that way though. Here's another angled pocket, anchor, nested square. And at the back, I matted, not the end, with some green and added it to the back at the bottom. So the title is at the top and the front, and "Not the End" is in the back, outside cover. What a beautiful book, right? It's so much fun to put together, and I can't wait to make more versions with existing page kits from Club Scrap. If you happen to have any of our page kits on hand, all of them would make great candidates for this little book. So I recommend you start out with this one and then pick up a kit or two and make some more in the papers and colors of your choice. Have fun with the triple folio book, and be sure to follow our YouTube channel at Club Scrap, and make sure you join our fun private Facebook chat group so we can get to know you. We'll see you there.